Yes, good morning, everyone. I welcome you to this lecture in African Ethics, PHY 219, as a follow up to our last discussion on the rationalist and the consequentialist foundations of morality in African ethics. Today, we shall be discussing Afro-communal relational principle. Before now, I want to believe strongly that Professor Azenabo has taught you some of the principles in African ethics. For instance, the Golden Rule principle, the principle of moralism, advocated or defended by C.S. Momo. Today, we shall be discussing Afro-communal relational principle as articulated by distinguished Professor Thaddeus Metz. Before now, we have treated this topic, but because of the importance of this topic to the course, I would like to have some recap of the essential points made in the earlier lecture during the face-to-face lecture period. However, before going to the bone of discussion, may I quickly call your attention to my observation in my capacity as your course advisor and also as a course instructor as far as this course is concerned, relating to how some of you have not been able to activate or be active on the LMS platform. We have reports reaching us from our own end there that many of you have not taken it so seriously. Please note, for the avoidance of doubt, your exam is fast approaching. The mode of the examination, according to the information we got from the management, is going to be online, and because of this, you need to acquaint yourself with the LMS procedures, mechanisms, and what have you. So I urge you to take seriously all the materials, announcements, tests that you have on are posted to the LMS platform. So having said this, our objective today is to discuss what Thaddeus Metz called Afro-communal relational principle as one of the principles in African ethics. So I hope that at the end of today, you should be able to come to an appreciable understanding of the motivation of Thaddeus Metz. What led him into thinking about or developing Afro-communal relational principle? What is the whole idea of Ubuntu? What are the examples that he gave in comparing some moral intuitions in African ethical contexts as distinct from the Western understanding of some examples of morally right actions? You should be able to understand Thaddeus Metz's approach to formulating an African moral principle. He listed some examples, and the one that he favors most, and the reason why he chose that. And at the end, I expect that we should be able to appraise the cogency or otherwise of what is called Afro-communal relational principle. Having said this, recall that during our last lecture, I told you how some African scholars have defined African ethics. For Thaddeus Metz, African ethics means those values associated with the largely black people residing in sub-Saharan Africa. The reflection on those values and their further refinements intellectually, okay, constitute African ethics for him. And his idea of African ethics, as I said, clearly excluded Islamic Arabs in North Africa, the white Afrikaners in South Africa, and the likes, because his interest is to look at the dominant and common values amongst black Africans. So Thaddeus Metz is really concerned about the relatively little normative theorization about right action in African ethics. In other words, there is this, according to him, low theoretical attempt at formulating what can be called right action, principles of right actions, okay, a African ethical discourse. And his aim is to provide a comprehensive justification of all what morally permissible acts have in common in African moral intuition. So, with that in mind, Thaddeus Metz seeks to defend an African ethical principle that grows out of African soil and which differs substantially from dominant theories in Western ethics. In coming up with such a theory of rightness, Metz seeks to rationally reconstruct some of the dominant values associated with Ubuntu and some other cognate terms of Ubuntu that are quite prevalent among sub-Saharan Africans. So at this point, we may want to ask the question, what is Ubuntu? Thaddeus Metz based his Afro-communal relational principle on Ubuntu. When we say Ubuntu, Ubuntu is a Zulu word in South Africa that roughly means humaneness. The maxim of Ubuntu generally is that a person is a person through other person. I want to believe that before now, you might have come across some symbolic representations of Ubuntu online, where you have children that sat in circle and their legs form a kind of cooperative circle or uniform circle, or heads coming together in unison. There are so many symbolic representations of Ubuntu. Among the Yoruba, for instance, a popular magazine that has a semblance of what Ubuntu is saying is Eniyan ni aṣọ mi. That is, I am not just human without being clothed by other humans, without being surrounded by other humans. So when we talk about Ubuntu, clearly we have two senses of Ubuntu. We have the descriptive sense of Ubuntu. We also have the prescriptive sense of Ubuntu. Descriptively, when we say Ubuntu, it means that one's identity as a human being, okay, is in one way dependent on a community, at least call it in metaphysical sense, that the ontology of a being is anchored on the existence of the community. But at the level of prescription, which is the second sense of Ubuntu, Ubuntu is saying that one ought to morally support the community in certain ways because one's humanity is inextricably bound up to others or connected to others. So, if this is the plain meaning of Ubuntu, the question then is, how has Thaddeus Metz explored Ubuntu in order to arrive at what he called Afro-communal relational principle? Well, Metz cited some acts that are morally condemnable, both by people that believe so much in Ubuntu and some others that do not. For instance, in the West. Of course, I'm not saying that in Western culture that Ubuntu is, some of the basic principles of Ubuntu are quite strange to them. It would be too general to make such a claim. But the point is that if we are talking about dominant value, something that is so common within a given geographical space, Ubuntu is quite common amongst the blacks, Africans. So what Metz did was just to cite examples of some acts, and I think about 12 of them, that are acceptable or condemnable in both cultures. So we need to know that the first set of 6 examples that they gave said they are both common in the moral institutions of the Africans and the Westerners. From number 7 to number 12 examples that he gave, he said those immoral institutions hold more, okay, amongst the Africans than the Westerners. So let us start with a quick overview of some of the examples that he gave. He said to kill innocent people for money, okay, is considered as immoral, both in Western culture and in African culture. Secondly, to rape is never considered as morally right, regardless of the society, whether Western or African. Thirdly, to deceive, okay, deceit, at least when not done in self or other people's defense, is generally a morally condemnable act. Stealing is the fourth one, especially of unnecessary goods. Is not morally accepted, whether in African culture or in Western culture. On number 5 of the list is violating trust for marginal personal gains. Number 6 is racial discrimination in allocating opportunities, whether in African culture or Western culture. Metz said this is not morally acceptable. However, the 7th example that he gave, he said those moral intuitions, okay, from number 7 to 12, are more African than Western. For instance, making policy decisions in the face of dissent, that is, uh, when you make policy decisions in the face of dissent, that is, when you have some policy decisions being made on the basis of consensus, you have that as common more amongst the Africans, okay, than in Western culture. The other example, which is number 8, is retribution as a central aim of criminal justice, as opposed to seeking reconciliation. In African culture, reconciliation seems to hold sway as the aim of the justice system, or the criminal justice system. So he said reconciliation holds more among his Africans as opposed to retribution, which is quite dominant in Western culture. Creating wealth largely on a competitive basis as opposed to creating wealth on a cooperative basis. Creating wealth on a cooperative basis is more common among the Africans. Distributing wealth largely on the basis of individual rights as opposed to need. You have wealth being created more, okay, on the basis of rights, is a moral intuition that largely holds to be correct in Western culture. But for the Africans, it's saying that, okay, you create wealth largely on the basis of need, ignoring others and violating communal norms, as opposed to acknowledging others and upholding tradition. So in African culture, you have more of this, you consider it more ideal, acknowledging others, appreciating others, recognizing others, upholding tradition. And the last one that strikes me in one way, failing to marry and procreate, as opposed to creating a family. In African tradition, it's commonly accepted that, well, we need to create family more, okay? You need to create a family. So when you fail to marry or procreate, yes, it is considered immoral one way or the other. However, it is regarded more as an immoral action, okay, amongst the Africans. So with all this, Thaddeus Smith said, clearly one can say that some actions, moral intuitions regarding rightness or wrongness of action may differ. But that is not to say that some actions are not universally condemned or morally accepted as correct. So on that basis, Thaddeus Smith came up with 6 possible ways of formulating an African moral theory on the basis of Ubuntu. Okay, for him, he said that the first one, which we call Ubuntu 1, is that an action is right just insofar as it respects a person's dignity, and that an action is wrong to the extent that it degrades humanity. So what Metz did was to formulate 6 potential ways by which we can formulate a morally right action, okay, principle of morally right action from Ubuntu worldview. Okay, so he listed 6, but at the end of the day, he supported and defended the last formulation as more intellectually cogent and reflective of the Africans. So what I want to do is To take you through quickly uh, the 6 possible ways of formulating an African moral theory, and now tell you why the last one strikes him the most. So the first one, as I earlier said, is that an action is right to the extent that it respects a person's dignity, and an action will be wrong insofar as such an action degrades humanity. The second formulation of Ubuntu moral theory as a potential candidate of Ubuntu moral theory is that an action is right just insofar as it promotes the well-being of others, and that an action will be wrong to the extent that it fails to enhance the welfare of one's fellow. The third formulation that he came up with is that an action is right just insofar as it promotes the well-being of others without violating their rights. And conversely, an action will be wrong to the extent that it either violates rights or fails to enhance the welfare of one's fellow without violating their rights. This second and third formulation are not the same. Okay, of course, you have the idea of well-being in both, but right is attached to the third formulation. So the fourth formulation of Ubuntu moral theory is that an action is right just insofar as it positively relates to others and thereby realizes oneself. An action will be wrong in that context to the extent that it does not perfect one's valuable nature as a social being. Is number 5 formulation of Ubuntu moral theory is that an action is right just insofar as it is in solidarity with groups whose survival is threatened, and an action is wrong to the extent that it fails to support a vulnerable community. And the last one is that an action is right just insofar as it produces harmony and reduces discord. An action will be wrong to the extent that it fails to develop community. So these 6 potential candidates of Ubuntu moral theory derive from number 7 to 12 formulations. Okay, number 7 to 12 reflection or articulation of moral intuitions that are quite common more amongst the Africans than amongst the Westerners. So if you take a look at number 1 to 4 account of Ubuntu grounded moral theory, those formulations construct the morality of an action on something more internal, for instance, like on dignity. However, if you take a look at a closer look at Ubuntu 5 and 6, they are more external oriented, communitarian in nature, and therefore for Thaddeus Metz, Ubuntu 5 and Ubuntu 6 align more with the idea of Ubuntu. However, for him, the most promising theoretical formulation of an African ethics, okay, or of a principle of right action in African ethics, is that what is right is what connects people together, and what separates people is wrong. So for him, an African moral theory is communal. It involves harmony. It involves shared identity. It promotes equilibrium between African persons with the other beings in the community. So, what Thaddeus Met is saying here is that when we are thinking about African moral theory of right action, but we can develop it right from Ubuntu. However, it is important at this point to note that the idea of Ubuntu did not originate with Thaddeus Met, and in fact, he was not even the first scholar to offer normative, ontological, or ecological explanations of Ubuntu. Many scholars have done that before him. However, Met's interpretation of Ubuntu, his analytic reflection on Ubuntu, his application of Ubuntu, especially to different aspects of contemporary African experiences and global realities, is quite robust, and that is why is being discussed in this course. So, according to that moral theory, okay, that principle of right action, actions are wrong not merely insofar as they harm people, okay, which is the conception of a morally right action in utilitarianism, okay, that the more the action harm people, the more it brings unhappiness to people. To that extent, such an action will be wrong. That is not what Ubuntu formulated moral theory of right action is saying. In fact, his position is also not the same with what you have in Kantianism, okay, where the wrongness of an action is based, among others, on whether it degrades an individual's autonomy or not. However, Afro-communal relational principle is saying that an action will be wrong to the extent that such an action is unfriendly, okay, or fail to respect friendship or even the capacity for friendship. Of course, I will not be going to a further development of Thaddeus Met's theory of African moral theory that he called modal relationalism. Okay, I will not be going to the details of that as far as this course is concerned, because that one has to do with the capacity. It's not when you have or when you express relationship with others, but when you have capacity to express relationship with others. Okay, that is the modal relational aspect of his theory. We are not going into details about that. So the point he's saying is that actions such as deception, coercion, exploitation, amongst others, even rape, okay, they fail to honor communal relationships because the actor, the moral agent in question, is distancing himself or herself from the person acted upon. So instead of you enjoying a sense of togetherness with that person, you are distancing yourself. So such an action is not facilitating or promoting communal relationship. So on Met's account, one's action is morally right only when such action promotes cooperative relations or honor friendships. So respecting relationship is what makes one a person. Ubuntu is saying that you are human insofar as you are in recognition of others, insofar as you recognize the humanity of others. So Men think that relationship is the basis of morality and moral status. As far as this topic is concerned, this course is concerned, we are not going to discuss Thaddeus Metzi's theory, African moral theory of moral status. But that's not the immediate concern. We are discussing is Afro-communal relational principle, and in that principle, relationship is key in determining whether an action is morally right or wrong. Here we have two elements of relationship. The first part has to do with what we call harmony or shared identity, and the second part has to do with